Welcome back to Snowy Owl Knits. Today's demonstration is for those of you who are absolute beginners to knitting and you have your new knitting needles and you have a ball of yarn and you're wondering what to do next. Where do I begin? Well, let's start with the basics. What we need to do is put some stitches onto this needle that we can work with, and that process is called casting on. And while there are many methods of casting on, I want to show you the most commonly used method today. It's very versatile, and then there are some variations on it that you can do later. It makes for a nice, neat edge. Now I will say this, when you first watch this, it looks like it's very complicated, but it really isn't. I'm going to show you step by step just how to proceed. So what I want to do is pull out a length of yarn from my ball, and we're going to leave a little bit of yarn here at the end that we call the tail. And from there, I want to put on, let's say, 10 stitches. So what I'm going to do is hold my tail in place like this on the needle, and I'm going to wrap my yarn around it 10 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A little more yarn. 8, 9, 10. Now when I pull them off, holding it in place there and keeping my tail end between my fingers, then I have enough yarn in between my fingers to make those 10 stitches. So we're going to begin like this. The first thing you want to do is lay the yarn open in your hand, okay? This is the tail end coming out this way, and this is coming from your ball of yarn. I'm going to pull a little extra out so I can work with it. I'm still holding on to that center point. Now, slip your thumb underneath so that you're making a bridge and grab both ends of yarn between your hands like this. Very simple, okay? You had your finger here, put your thumb through it and grab. What you want is this nice bridge between your fingers. When we get to this point, you'll notice I have kind of a loop over my thumb and a loop over my index finger. And that's how we're going to create the stitches on the knitting needle. The first step is just to place your needle on top of the bridge and swivel it towards your index finger and under, and then let it come back to rest on your needle. This is your first stitch. Many people like to put a slip knot at the end, but that means you'll have kind of a bumpy place when you're finished, and it's harder to hide that. So this is your first stitch. Now lay your hands out again, holding on to that first stitch between your thumb and index finger, and go to the outside loop of the yarn that's closest to you on your thumb, and you scoop it up onto the needle, and you kind of pivot your hand around, and you go over the top of the yarn on your index finger and scoop that up. Notice this little hole I've made here. We're going to take that knitting needle with what you just scooped up and go right through that hole, and then release your thumb and sort of tug on it just a little bit so that you get these yarns underneath, the yarn underneath, just a little snug. You've made your second stitch, and you want to make sure that you can slide your yarn easily up and down, but you still have a little tension there which will hold them on. You're still holding your yarn with your fingers down here, and you go back to the beginning position, and we go over the yarn on your thumb, and we pick up over the yarn on your index finger and bring it through that hole. And that makes 3 stitches. Tighten it up just a little bit and go back to your starting position. Through the thumb loop from underneath, through the index finger loop from above, and back through the hole. Release your thumb and tighten. There's 4. I'm going to do it several more times so that you can really see what's going on. I'm holding on with my fingers to the stitch I just put on there. I'm going to the loop on my thumb. I'm going under it to pick it up. I'm going to my index finger and going around it and bringing it back through my thumb, releasing my thumb, and just snugging up that stitch. So I've got 5 more I want to do. We'll go just a little bit faster. Under thumb, over finger, through the loop, and release the thumb. Tighten up. Under thumb, over finger, through the loop, release your thumb. Again, under thumb, over finger, through the loop, release your thumb. Under thumb, over finger, through the loop, tighten up. And last one, under thumb, over finger, through the loop. We now have 10 stitches cast onto our needle, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We've left just enough yarn tail so that we can weave this in later. So now what? You've got your 10 stitches on the needle. I think the next logical step is to go ahead and learn how to do the basic knit stitch. In knitting, the 2 basic stitches are the knit stitch and the purl stitch, and with a combination of those and some variations, you can do just about everything. So let's begin by looking at what we're going to be working with. When you start working, you want the thicker part of your work, the actual work that will be growing, to be on the right-hand side of your needle. And you're going to be using your other knitting needle to create the stitches and pull them off of this needle, put them on this needle. Let me show you how I go about holding my yarn so that you'll know one method that you can try. I'm a continental knitter, and that means that I use my working hand, or the hand that's holding the live stitches, to also work the yarn. If I were knitting English style, I'd be working with the yarn in this hand with the needle. That's the big difference. So with knitting, you want your yarn to be in back of your work, not in front of it like this. You're going to start with it in back. I like to wrap the yarn around my wrist and then bring my index finger up like this so that I can maneuver the yarn as I'm working. If I need to tighten it up a little bit, I can, give a little tug here on my wrist. So the basic knit stitch is like this. We're going to use the empty needle and we're going to insert it into that first loop through the back, and we've made an X. And then we're going to wrap that yarn around the second needle And we're going to pull that second needle down and through this cast on stitch. And when you can see this, then you can pull that worked stitch off of your needle and you're ready to move on to the next stitch. We go down through the yarn from the front to the back, making the X. We wrap our yarn counterclockwise. Make sure you're going counterclockwise. If you need to hold on to it to make sure you're getting it, that's fine. Pull that loop back down through the front, and when you see that the stitch is on your needle, slip it off of the left needle. Let's show that again. We're going from the front to the back, making the X, wrapping the yarn around it counterclockwise, and pulling that loop through and off. In through the front, make the X, counterclockwise, pick that yarn up, and pull it through and off. In through the front, making your X, grabbing that yarn and pulling it through and off. Through, counterclockwise, through again, and off. After a while, you'll work up a rhythm and find your preferred way of tensioning or maintaining control over your yarn, and it will begin to feel very comfortable to you. When you first begin, everything will feel pretty foreign. Now notice I'm holding on to the stitch that I just took off. I've got a little bit of tension on this finger, and I'm sort of making sure with my thumb here that I'm guiding stitches up, ready to be worked. We don't want to try to work them from too far down here or from too far up near the tip, because you stand a chance of it falling off. So kind of keep it back and use that natural tension between this hand and this hand to make that yarn do just what you want. Going slow is actually more difficult than you think. But, okay, last stitch. It's a little different because we just looped it over, but once we do this knit stitch into it, it's ready to go. So we've just finished up our first row. You now have an empty needle. Switch that to your other hand and turn your work around so that the work stitches are now in the inside of your work area. You're not going to work loops that are with this facing over there. Your tail will now be down at the bottom. If it looks loose, go ahead and tug it up a little bit. So go ahead and practice on these stitches. Rewind this if you need, and do about 15 to 18 rows of those 10 stitches and be easy on yourself. If it doesn't feel natural or comfortable, that's quite okay. With practice and just a little bit of finagling, finding your own style of holding everything, you're going to be great. And when we come back, I'll show you how to bind off this project.